MMA fans, content creators have to quit obsessing over every little thing that Michael Chandler has been doing over the last 2 years. And that's what I'm going to talk about in today's video. My name is James Lynch. So obviously the big talking point for the last few years has been this Michael Chandler and Conor McGregor fight. And everyone seems to want to pile on to Michael Chandler. And I'm not even like a big Michael Chandler fan. I just see this situation totally differently than everyone else. It's something I've talked about on my live streams. And in today's video, I'm finally going to explain my reasoning in detail so I don't have to keep talking about this over and over again, because this reminds me of like the is Khabib going to come out of retirement talk that just kept going on and on and on. Is GSP coming out of retirement? This is what this reminds me of. It's this big tease that hasn't happened. I mean, even at the time of recording this, BJPenn.com one day ago, Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler appear to agree on December timeline. Like, I don't know if this fight isn't going to happen, but fans got to quit worrying about every little thing that Chandler does. And one thing I'll say too is I know this is an unpopular opinion. I know a lot of people are on the side of crapping on everything that Michael Chandler does, but one of the things you got to know about my YouTube channel, if you've been watching me for years, is that I don't lie to you guys. I tell you guys the truth, even if it's something that I don't think is a popular point with most people. I don't lie to my audience for clicks. There's some content creators that do. We don't need to talk about them here, but that's not what I do here. So that's what we're going to get into today, and let's get right into it right now. So let's first look at Michael Chandler's, run in the UFC so far. Came into the UFC in 2021. Getting that big win over Dan Hooker, does the promo, gets the title shot. So right off the bat, fans hated Michael Chandler because, we just had one fight in the UFC and then he gets a title shot, not really realizing the type of run that he had in Bellator and not realizing that he was the face of Bellator for a long time. Like, remember he was in the Dave & Buster commercials? Like, years ago, if you would watch Bellator back in the Bjorn Rebney days, back in the early Scott Coker days, Michael Chandler was the face of the promotion. I feel like a lot of fans that are crapping on Chandler didn't watch that era, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So he gets the title shot against Oliveira. People don't like him. He then loses against Justin Gaethje. Had a kind of a rough first round against Tony Ferguson, pulls out and gets the finish, and then he fights Poirier and loses via rear naked choke. So all I'm seeing here optically is him losing 3 of his last 4 fights, and that fight, which was against Poirier in November of 2022, which was a while ago, Chandler's 36 years old. Now, we know the stat. I'm not a huge fan of it, but what does everyone talk about? How many fighters over 36 years of age are going to be able to capture a UFC title? Not many are happening. And if you look at the optics here with Chandler, he's lost 3 of his last 4. He'd need at least 2 or 3 really good wins to get back into title contention. So I think there's this school of thought that people believe that Michael Chandler, is wasting his time right now trying to go after the McGregor fight because he was going to go on a run to the title. I just didn't think that was going to happen. I'm going to put this in a different perspective. What if Chandler, after this fight, had retired? At 36, I think that's pretty reasonable. He's had a very accomplished career, won all of his fights, a lot of fights in Bellator, became the champion, ended up, becoming a big brand there. Like, what Chandler did was actually very smart. I'm sure there were opportunities for him to go to the UFC earlier in his Bellator career, but what he did was he built up that brand to the point of where the UFC wanted to bring him over. It wasn't a case of like he's begging to get in and the UFC puts him on the prelims. It was a case of his brand was so strong that the UFC's like, okay, we have to get this guy. He's entertaining. He's good on the mic. We got to get him in the UFC. So Chandler actually played this perfectly. So towards the latter half of his career, he goes to the UFC. He tries to win the title, ends up losing, and then loses 2 key fights. I think if he would have retired at that point, it's no big deal. He's accomplished a ton already. I mean, there was a school of thought that maybe he was never even going to fight for the UFC. So that's what I mean. Let's say Chandler had just retired after 2022 and there was no McGregor, no Ultimate Fighter. Would people really be upset by that? But people would really be like shocked by him retiring at 36 years of age? I don't think so. But of course, Chandler's a competitor, and in comes in this opportunity to coach opposite Conor McGregor and the Ultimate Fighter, and they're going to put this fight together. And what's the one thing outside of winning a title, a UFC title, that Chandler could do in his career? It's get big fights, and it doesn't get any bigger than Conor McGregor. Despite what fans think now, he is still the biggest star in MMA ever. There's no one that comes close. McGregor is the biggest superstar the UFC's ever seen. So to me, him trying to go after that fight was worth it, in my opinion. Now you can see it there. They were supposed to fight at UFC 303. The fight gets postponed. Then we heard maybe September. It's not happening there. At the time I'm recording this, if I'm a betting man, I'll say the fight probably doesn't happen. And I was not this way a few months ago. I thought no matter what, this is going to happen. It's not a big deal. But here's the other thing too about sort of retirement that I touched on. Let's say he retired after the Poirier fight. Chandler's making good money. He made a lot of good money in Bellator. Like I mentioned, was in the Dave & Buster commercials. And we know that Bellator pays their fighters well. Remember this whole situation with Gegard Mousasi going to PFL is that the contract was pretty expensive. So we know that the numbers were good for Chandler back when he was fighting for Bellator. So there's that. The UFC seems to be paying him pretty well because like I said, the UFC wanted him. They got him. You know, it's not like he's begging to get in the UFC and they kind of lowball him on a contract. I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm sure Chandler's getting paid well in the UFC, and he's also a gym owner. Like, I don't get the sense that Chandler is someone that's struggling to make a living for his family. So if you keep all this in mind, what does he need to fight for? He's not, like I said, I don't think he's going to make a run to the title. And if he's retiring, he's set already. And I think that's outside of the gym. He has other, you know, things that he's making money on as well. So, and then let's talk a bit about his Bellator career a little bit too, because I watched Chandler's Bellator career. If you even go look like way back on Fight Network's YouTube channel back in the day when I used to work for them, I was even doing highlights for Bellator cards, and you can find me doing highlights for some of these earlier Bellator cards. So I remember watching Chandler from the beginning. I remember his first fight against Marcin Held way back in 2011. Like, I saw it all. And so basically, for those who didn't watch Chandler's run, and I think that's a lot of people, again, who are crapping on him, he basically came out of nowhere. Like, he had a good wrestling pedigree, you know, won a bunch of fights. This was back when Bellator used to do the weekly tournaments. It actually kind of worked. Chandler was kind of a guy that proved that the old Bjorn Rebney tournament style actually worked, because here's a guy that a lot of people didn't know about. He works his way up, and he ends up getting this fight with Eddie Alvarez, which, if you guys have not seen the fight with Eddie Alvarez at Bellator 58, it's my favorite fight of all time. It's so entertaining because here's Chandler, kind of this unknown guy, coming in and giving it to Eddie Alvarez, and it was just a back and forth entertaining fight to the point where Chandler wins the title in the 4th round via rear naked choke. Alvarez was considered one of the top lightweights outside the UFC at the time. And it was like a huge fight, and it put Chandler on the map, and it basically made Chandler the face of Bellator going forward. And after that, obviously he had, you know, some setbacks. I remember the Will Brooks fight and a few other things, but overall Chandler was always the guy for Bellator, and he was someone they use on, you know, headline cards and to kind of move forward. So again, I want to be clear here that, like, Chandler could have never gone to the UFC, and he still would have had a very good career overall because of what he was able to do in Bellator. So I think that's a very key thing. And then again, I mentioned he goes to the UFC, and look who he's fought. Like, again, Dan Hooker, big name in the division. Charles Oliveira, the champ, huge name in the division. Gaethje, big name. Ferguson, big name. Poirier, big name. My question to you is, if you don't think that Chandler's going to go and make a run to the title, what other big name fights are available for him right now? Let's say after Poirier, there was no Conor, he could have pushed for some big fights. What names did those look like? Colby Covington, maybe up a weight class. Is that a fight that Colby wants? What does Colby gain out of that at the time? If you're looking back a couple of years ago, right? Colby was looking for, you know, older fighters and trying to get his title shot. Chandler, to me, was never a realistic option. Then let's talk about something more recently. I know that Chandler's talked about maybe Max Holloway and the BMF title and things like that. Well, right now, Max is booked against Ilia Topuria. There's no talk or plans of him defending that title, and I don't think that's really an option for him either. So my question to you is kind of looking at the rankings right now, like, who else would Chandler fight that's a big name fight? You know, like who really is that, like, marquee fight that Chandler needs to fight to add to his legacy? To me, there's no one here. Now let's go on the flip side. Let's say you are a believer that Chandler at 36 wasn't done and he could have had one more run in him left to go win the title. What are some options for him as other opponents that he hasn't fought? Because again, a lot of these fights, he's not going to get rematches. Gamrot. Does he beat a Gamrot? I don't know. I don't know if he beats a Gamrot. I think that's a 50-50 fight. Dariush, I think that's a winnable fight, but my understanding is that I think they're friends, so I don't know if that's a fight that ever would have happened, but that could have been maybe a fight for him, but even then, he'd still need another win on top of that to get it. Does he beat Rafael Fiziev? I don't know if he does. Like, this is what I'm getting at. Like, he could have fought these other guys and you know, worked his way back up, but if I'm being realistic here, I don't think Chandler beats a lot of these guys, and maybe I'm downplaying Chandler's ability after I'm, you know, raving about, you know, what he's accomplished, but I just didn't see Chandler after losing that Poirier fight, especially getting finished in that fight. Like, if it was a close decision, I could understand people being like, okay, he's still got a run left in him. But after I saw that fight in 2022, I'm kind of like, I don't think Chandler's going to be fighting for a title again. Now, I know people are going to point out that Chandler is obviously, you know, called out Holloway and called out Islam, so he himself maybe believes he could get a title shot, but I think optically, looking outside, I don't think that was ever really going to happen. So, you know, I just, again, like, I think Chandler, to me, could have just retired after Poirier and we'd still be in the same spot and fans wouldn't care nearly as enough. But fans have this idea that Chandler is somehow wasting away his career. Yes, he's 38 now. How old is Chandler right now? He's 38. Oh, he's wasted his career. What options were better? Let's say he fights a Jalen Turner, who's an up-and-comer. What if he loses that fight? Would that not be worse than him waiting for a Conor McGregor fight? To me, and I've said this from the beginning, I think Chandler waiting out for McGregor is the last piece of the puzzle for his career. That's the one name he hasn't fought. That's the biggest name he could fight in his career. And to me, it's worth the risk. It's either retirement or it's, you know, fight Conor. And I don't really think he's wasting any time, because to me, he could have just retired and we'd be in the exact same spot. So that's kind of where I stand on everything. I just don't get, I think it's partial. People didn't like Chandler coming in the UFC and getting the title shot. It's part that people somehow think that Chandler was going to go back on a title run. I think it's those two things as to why people are obsessing over every little thing he does, because I see content creators and fans, every interview he says, oh, this guy's delusional. Oh, he's mentally breaking down. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm not a big Chandler fan, but to me, that seems a little extreme, guys. It really does. So wanted to put this video out, put this to rest. Anytime I get an argument about Michael Chandler, I'm just going to send people this way, but that's how I feel about the situation. I don't think Chandler's wasting anything. I don't think it's a big deal. To me, if I'm at his stage in his career where I know it's probably not realistic fighting for a title again, you go for it's Conor or bust. And I don't think that's the worst strategy in the world. So that's kind of my thoughts on Michael Chandler overall. And hopefully we can put this to bed. So I know there's going to be a lot of people disagreeing with this, but let me know in the comments what you think about my theory on Michael Chandler and why I don't think it's a big deal he's not fighting right now. Follow me on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, @LynchOnSports. My name is James Lynch. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.